Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you're joining from. We will get started in about a minute or so, just letting people join. Hope everyone's week is off to a good start. Good. So why don't we get started? Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rahul Kapoor. I lead the FinTech practice at CRG Partners. Really excited to host this webinar today and to moderate this. We have three great experts to talk about the evolution of the finance function within specialty finance and specialty lending. It's a topic that we're all having a lot of conversations with our clients about, particularly given the rise of AI, given the fluctuating capital markets and operating capital availability. So we're really excited to have this discussion today. I'll let the experts here introduce themselves, but we have David Rappaport, who's the head of fractional CFO and advisory at LF. Derek Watson, who's a partner at ScalePoint, and my colleague Ken Lubin, who's the managing director and leads a lot of ZRG's work in the specialty finance space from ZRG. David, I'll turn it to you first to do a quick introduction of yourself.
Awesome. Thanks, Rahul. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I'm David. I lead the fractional CFO practice here at LF. We're an AI-powered FP&A tool and dedicated to helping teams, finance teams, scale and grow effectively by helping them streamline their internal operations. Real excited to be here today, and I'm based in Austin, Texas. Derek, I'll kick it over to you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, Derek Watson. I run the fractional CFO practice at ScalePoint Advisors. We provide fractional CFO and capital markets advisory services to early stage lending businesses, think Series C, A, B, that, don't need a full-time CFO on the team, but need that expertise because of the business model complexity and also the debt complexity that comes with lending-based businesses. So pass it over to Ken.
So Ken Lubin here. I've been with ZRG Partners the last 25 years, focused placing senior level executives in the specialty lending marketplace, from equipment finance through fintech through crypto-based money. So anything sort of specialty money is the market that we play in. But now we're seeing the rise of AI and the importance of the CFO using AI and the FP&A function with AI. So really looking forward to chatting with everyone a bit about this and what we're seeing in the market and what you're seeing in the market.
Great. Thanks, guys. Great to have all of you. Why don't we start with the big picture? And every founder in the audience right now is making finance organization decisions based on playbooks that were quite honestly written before the last 2 years, in particular with the proliferation of AI and just, how much foothold that's taken to replace some of the things that we traditionally did by hand or by human interaction. Before tools like LF existed, before fractional CFOs were a default option. So let me put the question to all three of you. If you were advising a founder today in 2026 on June 16th, what's the single biggest thing that they're getting wrong about how to build their finance function? Derek, I'll turn to you to start.
Okay. Well, I think it honestly depends on what stage the business is at, right? So earlier, I think, index with probably, I would say this, wouldn't I? But, fractional CFO help to get your model up and running, to do your fundraising, to get your first credit facility up and running. And then as the business progresses through the stages, product is launched, it's scaling. That's where things like AI tools and David's space come into it a bit more. But at seed, maybe even A, I think common mistakes, probably twofold. One is maybe leaving it a bit late to bring in expertise and kind of taking it as far as maybe a CEO type figure can take it. but then that often misses like critical nuances that build up problems for later, especially when it comes to operationalizing a credit facility, managing the covenants, managing your cash flow. So that's one side, leaving it a bit late. But then the other side is taking it the other way and maybe going a bit too, hiring too senior too early. And then you have an expensive resource that's maybe not fully utilized. That potentially also creates a bit of a top-heavy org chart a bit too early in the life of the business, and you can have too many cooks spoiling the soup, as it were. So yeah, when I think about what we see often at the earlier stage, it's either leaving it too late or going or taking on too large and expensive a resource too early.
And Ken, it's a really great point about too large, too early. Ken, from your perspective, from an executive search perspective, what do you see as kind of what the mistakes are that people are making today, or what people have made in the light of AI and other factors?
Well, I think too, right? I think the importance of, and like Derek was talking about, is getting too top heavy too fast. We've built businesses from the ground floor, and even before AI, really, finding someone who's a functional VP of finance, right? Find someone who understands the FP&A function, someone early on who's much more hands-on. And I think really going from the fractional piece to the permanent piece, that could be a unique play, because if you have a fractional CFO who's a bit more senior, they could hand off the tools that they've known to someone who's a bit more junior who could then ramp up. So really, I think a lot of people have been seeing the big dollar swallow is not really where it needs to be early stage. I think that's later stage type stuff. And with AI becoming more and more incorporated, I think the second tier, the VP of finance, the directors of finance, those are actually the ones using AI much more than, say, a typical CFO is using it, because they're much more in the weeds in the day-to-day operation, right? So you've got to sort of find the perfect, combination of what works and what doesn't work based on timing is typically what we're seeing right now.
And David, that's interesting from your perspective. I'm sure you're seeing it in a different way, given the angle you come at it from the technology and the AI side. Curious as to what you're seeing as what's working and what mistakes people are making right now in terms of building their finance organizations.
Yeah, I think first, like one of the biggest things that we see a lot is that the playbook that maybe founders and VC and funds were using 3 years ago, 2 years ago, in terms of like when we reach X milestone, we're going to bring these people on. Like that playbook has completely changed, and in a really wild way, where a lot of firms would like raise their Series A, and then it's time to hire a VP of finance. We're seeing a lot of firms move, a lot of companies move a lot later in the journey because of all the tools and the automations that the internal companies can do themselves. So I'd say like the playbook has changed a lot. And then maybe Ken, to the point that you were saying, is like what we're seeing is that the expectation is that everyone is not just a leader and a strategy person, but everyone ranging from the CFO down to the lowest level analyst are the ones that are actually getting their hands dirty, because that's the expectation of not just do you know our business inside and out, but how are you testing a new workflow? How are you helping automate something? How are you helping us, improve our operations? And that really starts at all the way from the top and top down as well as bottoms up. And so I challenge that a little bit in terms of like, I think the most impactful CFOs that we're seeing today are actually the ones that are driving the organizational change forward and pushing the AI adoption and really saying, how do I not go hire that next person because I've just done this entire workflow end to end with the help of AI in a way where I used to have to go spend and hire that next analyst. So I'd say the world is changing, and it feels like if we did this webinar, 3 months ago, we probably would have had very different answers. And that's like the fast pace of change that we're seeing. And the best organizations are the ones that are really like on the cutting edge of how do we continue to improve operations day in and day out.
Great. Thank you. Before we move on, just a reminder to the audience, there is a Q&A button if you would like to submit any questions that our panel can speak to later. Please put them in, and we'll work them into the discussion. Wanted to turn back to the pre-seed and seed in the fractional CFO era. And Derek, you've run ScalePoint's fractional CFO practice, worked across dozens of specialty finance companies, and plug to your book, which I'll let you plug. The data in your book's pretty clear. At pre-seed and seed, there's almost always a fractional CFO, but not a full-time hire. But there's a wide range of what fractional really is. Some people think of interim, some people think of truly 20, 30%. Some people think of they're fractional and end up being full-time anyway. Walk us through what a great pre-seed and seed engagement actually looks like, what the founders should be getting for their money, and what the early warning signs are that their fractional CFO is the wrong fit, because often that does happen.
Okay, yeah, I think rather than anchoring it in things like, a set number of hours or, is it interim or part-time or whatever, it's more important to focus on the actual deliverables that the client needs at that time, right? And the deliverables, change over the course of as things progress through the stages, right? I think at pre-seed, really the role of a fractional CFO or a finance advisor is kind of anchored on the financial model, right? The financial model that's needed for the fundraise. Oftentimes we see founders that are coming into this lending space that are not coming from a financial services background, right? So their financial modeling, it might just be a little bit too one-dimensional for the type of product and business that they want to launch. And I specifically focus on really the debt and the cash flow aspect of it. Everyone can build a P&L, right? You don't have to be a CFO caliber person to build a P&L forecast. But where it gets tricky for lending businesses is the balance sheet element, right? Like you're going to have a credit facility, there's going to be haircut capital, and really dialing in your fundraising journey in terms of, how much debt are you going to need and how much equity are you going to need and when to support that volume that you're forecasting. And that requires just a little bit of understanding of the additional nuances. Thanks for the book plug. We've released a book called Technology Enabled Lending that kind of covers those additional things, right? So everyone, or many people, good generalist founders, good entrepreneurs, but there's a few additional nuances for lending businesses that people should know, right? There's the capital markets, there's the more complexity in the finance function, there's credit risk, there's compliance, BD and partnerships. So we do cover that. And back to the question, early is sort of the model. Then once some fundraising gets done, things are starting to take shape. It migrates a little bit into making sure the finance infrastructure, the foundational level is solid, right? So, some good accountants that know that type of business model, a really good structure of, chart of accounts in the P&L and balance sheet, kind of laying the groundwork so that, problems don't build up in the future, right? It's like looking ahead. And a lot of it is just kind of rinse and repeat, these, once you've done this a few times, you kind of know where the challenges are. And it's our job as advisors to help clients get ahead of them. With regards to how things evolve, and back to the AI discussion, I think obviously at the seed and pre-seed stage, AI doesn't really come into it. You might use the general tools for your research. But I think once the finance function starts to evolve, where there's more work to do, there's more analytical work to do, more FP&A type work to do, that's where the equation really changes. Because in the past, you might, think that's when we need to hire a VP of finance and kind of sunset this fractional CFO. But I think now you could probably hire like an FP&A specialist who's armed with tools like Aleph, and they can be so much more effective. So in that early stage, the kind of step change for like building out the leadership org is more of a smoother ramp, I think, with the tools available.
Right. And then that brings them to Series A, which, David, I'll turn to you. The FP&A inflection point is certainly something you've seen on both sides of this. Is you ran FP&A with Graphite with 70 clients and 15 staff under you. And now you're inside Aleph. watching how finance teams can deploy modern tooling and AI at this stage. And there's an old playbook that says Series A is where you make your first FP&A hire. Wondering if that's changing, because I'm hearing from a lot of founders that math has changed. What's actually shifting at Series A right now, and how should a founder think about the FP&A function and hire when a fractional CFO with the right tools can do a lot of what used to take a full-time analyst to do?
Yeah, I think where I'd like to start is that for a lot of companies, like Series A was really where you were like proving that you have a product, you can start to develop a go-to-market motion. Maybe you're starting to get kind of like some momentum as you get into your Series B fundraise. And that was really kind of the deciding factor of I need somebody that's going to help me be more hands-on, be more in the business day to day than a fractional CFO may have been. What we've seen is that a lot of companies are a lot earlier on in their journey finding product market fit, getting customers. And so we see this kind of like divergence in company stages where like the old Series A is actually probably a lot more of like seed stage of it's easy to get my product to market, maybe a little less so in like the capital markets lending side of things. But then what we're seeing is, on the other side of that is like a really heavy reliance on what Derek was mentioning of like that functional experience, where that first VP of finance that you might have hired before was kind of a generalist. They were going to do your financial model, they were going to oversee the accountants, they were maybe going to help in the fundraise, but maybe they don't have that really deep capital market experience. And so we agree with Derek where maybe that barrier to entry is not like a VP of finance first. It's an FP&A manager. It's a really good and young kind of senior analyst that has like done it a little bit in their career, but with the right guidance and support from a fractional CFO can actually grow into that VP of finance or director of finance over time with the guidance and support of knowing how to negotiate debt covenants and how to negotiate lender agreements that you only kind of get when you have seen it and done it multiple times in your career. And a lot of times at an early stage company, you can't afford that. So we see this really interesting split of like companies are getting traction a lot earlier on, which is forcing kind of this like, what do I do about my staffing to make sure that as a founder, you're getting the support you need? But then also like, how do I have enough hands on ground and that somebody's like deeply entrenched in my business to know how they can be helpful and strategic as we roll out a new product and we want the right metrics and they want to work with the marketing team. And so we're seeing this really interesting split in the market where, you know, that like that VP of finance of an early stage company is moving a lot later in the journey.
That's interesting. And that probably gets us to where they really move is it's in Series B. And I'll turn to Ken. Ken, you and I have shared lots of war stories about, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But you've placed, as you mentioned, 25 years placing finance leaders at growth stage specialty finance businesses. You've seen what happens when founders nail the in-house CFO hire, but you've also seen the other side where it hasn't worked. And so it brings up two questions. One, what's the trigger that the founder is motivated by that sees that it's time to sunset fractional or even interim and bring in a full-time CFO or VP of finance, to David's point about it's coming later in the cycle. But what is that trigger? And then secondly, what's the most common hiring mistake you see founders make at this stage and the one that's burned the companies that you've worked for from a senior finance, whether it's a VP of finance, head of FP&A, or a CFO hire?
I'll start with the second question first, right? Because you're talking about war stories. And as we all know, there's plenty of war stories in this business. And I think probably one of the biggest mistakes that you see founders make a lot of times is letting the investors influence who they need to hire too much, right? It's the investors, the PE firms, the VC firms think that you need one person where the current founder knows that they need a different person, right? So there can become a lot of headbutting at that point. A lot of founders typically will then go first with the recommendation of their investors. And then, secondly, in 90 days or 6 months out, who are, so-called perm hires, they have to hire someone who's to their style. And I think that's really where a lot of organizations struggle because founders think that their investors know more about the actual role versus what they actually do. Because founders have, their knowledge, they need to augment their knowledge, right? They don't need someone to come in and tell them what to do. They need someone who come in and partner with them. They sort of need the Wozniak to Jobs, right? They need someone who can be their right-hand person. So I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that we see, number one. Number two, a lot of times, this is where the fractional piece can come in, is thinking that you need one person versus understanding what you don't need, right? I think that's the second hardest part of, hey, I fell in love with this person. They said all the right things during the interview. They said, oh, this is what I've done, everything else. It's really weaning that out and getting good understanding. And then lastly is personality fit, right? If your personality doesn't mesh with your CFO, it's very difficult because the CFO now is no longer just an accountant. They're no longer just a numbers person, right? They're actually a partner in your business. And that's really where we can go into the next piece talk about sunsetting that person, sunsetting the fractional out into a permanent role. Because, as complexity increases, you need someone who's, really understands your business internally, right? Understands capital markets, warehousing lines, reporting, portfolio management. And that's really where a full-time finance leader becomes essential, CFO, VP of finance. Number two is you don't really, in a startup world, early season, early growth mode organizations, you don't want to hire someone who's coming from a Fortune 500, right? It's a totally different ballgame. I always like to say, every organization, people have expertise. There's a person who's great from taking a company from $1 million to 5 million, and then 5 million to 50 million, right? And then 50 million to 500 million, then 500 million to 5 billion. It's really understanding the expertise of who you need in based on, sort of the phase of your organization, because you're not going to go from, 20 million to 200 million overnight, right? Obviously it's going to take a while, and you need someone who understands that piece, because a lot of times a fractional CFO is much more of a, big company person versus getting in the weeds person. So you got to really understand that. And that sort of segues into my next thought, talking about, the player coach, right? Understanding, someone who can coach the team, who can coach the CEO, someone who can actually coach the investors is becoming more and more important. And understanding the AI automation behind it, right? And AI right now, it still just really helps with streamlining the process. That can help with forecasting, that can help with reporting, and covenant compliance and decision making. And the finance role is no longer just about the spreadsheets, but in the same sentence, you need someone who can still understand the spreadsheets, right? AI is not 100% yet. So, you need someone who can dig deep, who can question what actually AI is saying. And that comes with knowledge, right? That comes with market knowledge. And I think that's where, junior person versus too senior person, right? Sort of the Goldilocks. You're looking for someone who's right in the middle. That really gets that understanding. And another piece too is, you don't want someone who's going to, come in and overbuild the organization too quickly or come in too early. That's another issue, right? You come in, someone's like, I've done this, blah, 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 blah. And it's put in, it's put in I'm aging myself here, but putting a bus engine into, a GTI, right? Or a small little car. You don't need that giant engine yet. And that comes with the growth of the organization. And then, lastly is really, like I said earlier, hire for judgment, hire for communication, hire for leadership. These are all the important piece. And then tying AI into that, really taking that piece into it. And then lastly, AI is much more of it's still a tool, right? It's not a decision-making tool yet. And I think it's really important to understand that. And someone who understands the full nuances and the full leverage of AI tools, of what works and what doesn't work, is probably, it's just important as everything else. So those are, I think, some of the issues, that we see when people are making the transition to sunset a CFO, as well as someone who understands the AI component.
I think, Ken, just maybe real quick there, Rahul, like the way that I describe it with companies we work with is like, An early stage finance hire just has to have grit, and you have to be able to just roll up your sleeves and just do whatever it takes to get the job done. Not only because you're oftentimes like a team of one, but there isn't anyone else that knows the business better than you do, that's more directly interfacing with your investors and the CEO. And it's not to say that the first finance hire has to be best friends with the CEO, but I do think that like interpersonal relationship of what is constructive, what is supportive, how am I augmenting maybe where a CEO doesn't have the strongest skill set, and how am I complementary to building out the organization, is a really important part to figure out early on. Is this person going to be a right fit in the organization as we grow and scale, or is this a temporary solution until we get to X, and then we need to rethink what the org looks like as we reach that next milestone?
And we all know, right? CFOs are very process oriented, right? And David, to your point, I always like to say, you need someone at this level who can take the trash out on the way to the boardroom, right? And I think that's probably more important. And don't let ego become an issue, because ego can become an issue very quickly. And you need someone who's got their ego in check. I see a question from RJ, who's someone I know. You have to think like an operator, right? You got to think about a business operator rather than just knowing the numbers. And early on, the numbers are easy, right? It's when they become more complex down the road. So,
well, and you guys also hit on something when you talk about the right person, and RJ's question about thinking like an operator. And we got another question that was pre-sent actually before this, but David, on the FP&A hire, and you hit on this a little bit, and Ken hit on this a little bit with tools, et cetera, but what's the profile that actually works today? Because the job has changed. Person needs to be much more technical. They need to be comfortable with tools and things like Claude and Aleph, and comfortable working alongside a fractional CFO. What should the founder be screening for, and where do most founders go wrong on this hire? Oh, did we lose David? We lost him.
Looks like he's dropped off.
Yes, we can move on to the next question. We'll go back to David for that. Let's talk about the AI cross-cutting and zoom out a little bit.
He's back.
Oh, sorry about that.
So David, I don't know if you caught that question.
Yeah, I caught it. I think the CEOs that are screening for that first finance hire, I mentioned a little bit of like grit, willing to like roll up your sleeves, but I think it's also genuinely curious, one that's willing to test like the playbook from before of, I know what I want to achieve. Now, is there a better and a smarter way to ultimately do that now with the age of AI? And so somebody that's willing to push boundaries, but also keep the understanding that everything has to be 100% correct. And that's where AI can have some limitations. And so you have to be able to know those numbers inside and out. Maybe to a little bit of like RJ's question is, but you also have to be able to just get stuff done. There's going to be a lot of things that just the CEO asked for, the board asked for, the next investor in the next round asked for. And how are you stack ranking and prioritizing and just saying, this is now like what we need to prioritize to help keep the business running. And then here are the kind of the ideas that we're going to push to maybe the next week or the next quarter, because they aren't going to help us, close that next round or the debt facility or whatever it is. So I think it's like a really nice blend of somebody that's curious, working hard, has like experience at smaller companies. To Ken's point, like a Fortune 500 person probably doesn't deploy well into a $10 million Series A type of company. And it's not a knock on those backgrounds. I think it's just companies of that size operate very differently, and you have to be able to wear multiple hats, where one day you may be reviewing red lines on an agreement with your general counsel or your outside counsel. The next day you're at the board meeting. The next day you're leading a strategic planning session for the company. That's, I think, the fun of working at really kind of like earlier stage companies. But yeah, Derek, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting, yes, the CFO, whether full-time or fractional or VP finance, yes, they have to wear multiple hats. But I think what the business needs from its finance leader changes over time as well. And that kind of changes the persona that you need in the role, right? Like where we typically focus, seed A, B, the business is highly speculative at that point, right? Like we don't really know. It's an idea. We're spend a lot of time in fundraising. The business model might change, several times. A lot of A/B testing, and your finance leader needs to be totally comfortable in that operating environment of we don't really know yet what the business formula is that's going to be successful. So there's an element of agility that comes with that. And then the other piece is a lot of it is just putting in foundational blocks on which, a future finance leader can then take those and make them better. But then once you get to the B and what we're talking about now, yes, you still have to wear multiple hats, but the focus becomes more optimization, process, analysis, really starting to dial things in on maybe unit economics, pricing, or whatever it is. So I think it's just a general point that what you need from your finance leader is not the same as you go through the stages.
Great. Thank you both for that. And we actually got another question, and it's kind of gets more to brass tacks around costs. So the audience is interesting. Derek is really to Derek and Ken. Ballpark, what is a great fractional CFO engagement cost at seed and Series A? And then Ken, when a founder is ready to make that full-time hire at Series B, what's the comp range they should be budgeting for base plus equity? And how does that differ between a CFO or a VP of finance? Derek, I'll start with you. We'll go in life cycle of the.
Okay. So the most simple unit at pre-seed would just be like a standalone, financial model, and there's just not, it's not an ongoing thing. So we typically price that at $15,000 for the model. If it's model plus setup, I think at seed you're looking at kind of all in 5 to 10 a month, and then at A, I think you're looking at sort of 5 to 15 a month. That's what we typically see.
Great. And then Ken, as you migrate into a full-time hire?
Right. This is the question of the century, right? Everyone's always like, what does this mean? Is it equity? Is it base? Is it bonus? Right. It depends on what the investors want to give up. Or if, the owner owns 49% of the company, does he really want to give up equity? Right. So there's a bit of a gray area with this. And Rahul, we've dealt with this a lot recently where founders, they become a little bit territorial. They don't want to give equity up right away. So cash is king, right? So it varies across the board. But if, typically if you're looking at, Series B, you're looking at the base salary, probably 250 to 350, probably, average number is probably closer to 275 to 3.25 is really what we're seeing, with bonuses that are, 25 to 40%. Bonuses may be higher if there's no equity involved, right? So they'll go to 50 or 60%, or they'll do a bonus plus, percentage of, net profit of the business. And that can, some people want the equity, some people want the cash, right? So, and a lot of times too, a lot of CFOs are pretty smart about the equity because they know that a lot of the times that's just really a lottery ticket, but it can be a meaningful lottery ticket based on their, their knowledge of the market and what's going on. Growth Series B, $30 to $75 million businesses probably ratchet that up about 10, 20%. And then, later on, you're pushing it up another 10, 20% from there.
Ken, how do you think about advising CEOs that come to you about aligning incentives between what the CEO may want to drive in the business and what they're bringing the CFO in to do to make sure that everyone's kind of aligned of how they move forward?
A lot of them are really, sitting down with the CFO, right? Let's create KPIs is sort of the best way to do it, right? Versus totally being random. Be like, hey, you help us raise X. You help us with this securitization. You help us with, building, an equity plan, right? Internally, that type of stuff. So there's a lot of unique KPIs that you could use along the way. And I think that's really the only ways to measure people internally at the beginning versus, hey, you're just a good person and we're going to give you a bonus. And we have no idea really where we started and where we're going to. I think that's probably one of the hardest things, that's out there. And to be honest with you, a lot of CEOs are using tools like an AI tool, right? To say, hey, help me with this, help me create these KPIs, because it's a fairly unique model of compensation, right? And what's the base, and is the bonus a real bonus, right? Or is it a performance-based bonus? A lot of CFOs that come from big organizations think their bonus is a guaranteed bonus, right? A lot of CFOs that are coming from smaller organizations understand it's, a performance model, right? So you got to really understand that piece as well, to like, what's the performance, what performance is necessary to get your bonus. And it's, and it's, 9 times out of 10, it's company based, but there's a percentage of, you as the leader of what your bonus, or, what your performance states into the, your bonus payout.
And at the risk of a moderator answering his own question, I would say just to add to what you said, we find that CFOs are very much driven first, right? Just the nature of them. So to Ken's point, they see there's an equity play, but particularly with longer hold cycles by PE firms, or at Series B, et cetera, sometimes that, to Ken's point, is a lottery ticket that may never come to fruition. But one time we do see some CFOs, if they built something, they've exited and they want to do it again, that's where you might get somebody that's more equity driven. So there are a lot of variations to that, but I think, Ken, you hit on the right kind of target cash comp for a Series B type CFO. We've got about 7-8 minutes left. Wanted to close out with a very broad topic that I think all of you will have some great insights on. AI is the variable that's rewriting every part of this conversation, right? And that's kind of the underpinning of this whole webinar and this whole discussion. Derek, you're seeing it change how fractional CFOs work. David, you're building inside one of the tools that's driving a big change in the industry. And Ken, you're hearing it from CFO candidates about what they expect their stack to look like and how it's changing what their world's going to be, what their organization looks like. Sometimes their employees may not be employees. They may be AI agents, right? But let me ask each of you in the same question. In the next 12 to 18 months, what does the founder really need to understand about AI in finance, and what do they need to understand about it in order to make good decisions about their finance organization? And just as important, what's the hype they should ignore? What do you think that's overhyped right now that's not going to go away in terms of what a specialty finance company needs with their CFO suite and their CFO in their finance organization? Ken, I'll start with you on that one.
So it's pretty funny. I was actually having a conversation with a consultant yesterday who's actually a friend of mine, talking about, the use of AI, right, at the senior level and C-level executive. And it was really talking about, right now, it's still as a tool to augment, right, versus actually rely on 100%. And he works for one of the big consulting firms, and his coworkers are telling him, you can't tell the CEOs that, because in their head they think it's one way or the other. It's either all in or you're not all in. And I think that's the biggest thing right now, is that still it's a tool, right? It's not something that you can rely on 100% of the time, but it's a tool that can turn the work of 5 people into 10 people fairly quickly. So how do you use that? And I think that's really one of the biggest things that we're seeing out there is, the reliability on it is, I think there's much more hype around it, it's going to be stealing everyone's jobs and everything else. It's not even close to that, right? It's one of those things that is going to augment, the function, the CFO function. It's, we're starting to see it in sales, how it's augmenting sales. We're starting to see it in, research and all that type of stuff. So, in 18 months, will it be completely different? Who knows, right? The government shut down Claude, Claude's latest version a couple of days ago. And, where is this going to go? What's the actual tools, right? What regulations are going to be in play? Where is this going to go? Thinking forward down the road, I think is going to be the bigger issue. But right now, CFOs, finance roles, ops people are really using it as a tool to augment their current staff that they have.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit, Ken, and say that's actually not what we're seeing. We're
No?
seeing a lot when you talk about the work of 5. We're seeing that be turned into the work of 1 with AI agents doing the work to fill
That's what I'm
10.
saying. The work of
Yeah,
5 to 10 is what I said. The work of
yeah.
5 is a team of 10 people. So, yeah.
So we're seeing that, which is the agents, and depending on your setup and where your data flows and all of that is like contingent items, actually is streamlining a lot of operations for companies of all size, ranging from small kind of like 10 15 person companies up through hundreds of employees. And I think the companies that are truly like leading the charge are continuing to push on that every single day to say, how am I automating this workflow? How does this work that maybe was done offshore before can be done by an agent, and how do I trust and verify that workflow? And so I think, Rahul, to your question of like what happens in the next 12 to 18 months is I think the workflows of agents take over a lot more of the workflows that humans are doing today from end to end, where maybe companies or people don't have the belief that they can do it all today. But I think we're going to get there. I mean, we've seen it change so much in the last quarter alone. And so I think that's like where I feel strongly and we feel strongly is that agents are the workflow that most companies are going to get really good at and helping them streamline the operations of it all.
Yeah. And Derek, I'll give you the last word on this.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, if you think about where ScalePoint works, mainly at the seed A, B stage, I would think the importance is making sure your data systems and your data infrastructure are properly set up to be able to take advantage of the tools in the future. You have this golden window of opportunity while you're building it for the first time to think ahead and be like, okay, what are the future use cases that I'm going to deploy here with my AI tools? And we talk a bit about this in the book as well, Technology Enabled Lending, where there's often a problem with the data infrastructure that then struggles to do a lot of the financial reporting for the ABL facility. It's a version of that, but thinking about how you can maximize your potential to take advantage of operational efficiencies from AI by making sure your data, I would spend more time and more thought on your data infrastructure as like your pregame for when you're ready to deploy AI tools. We typically, you might see that often. It's kind of not quite rushed, but a lot of the data infrastructure covers the priority is more like the product experience and not really thinking about finance needs, which are going to be a fast follow once you operationalize things. But then now you should additionally think not only product and finance needs, but future operations needs that are going to, to be able to work effectively, they need really good data. So that's my 2 cents there.
Great. Turn it actually to one last thing for each of you. Any closing thoughts you'd like to leave everybody with?
Yeah, I think it's I think it's exciting times. I think it's easy to get caught up in the hype and lose sight of things. But I think if you take a step back and really think back to sort of first principles on your business and your business model, and especially at the early stage where you really have the opportunity to put in, you don't have any tech debt or systems debt. You have the opportunity to be really thoughtful about how are we going to build this sort of AI first and think about the upcoming years, while not losing sight of the fact that it's not a silver bullet that's going to solve all your problems. You still have to be a effective business manager and operator and entrepreneur.
I think I agree with you, Derek, like building from kind of the ground floor, building for scale and structure is interesting. But I know we talked a lot about kind of AI and some like pretty advanced like ideas and workflows. The thing that I would like take a major step back and say, if you aren't trying it today, don't be scared. Don't feel like you're behind. Like just start and experiment. And obviously don't use like real to like produce your board slides until you're 100% confident, but take that first step. Like try and build one workflow, try and connect to one data source, and say, wow, now that this is done, what can I do at my job? What can I do for my team? And just be willing and able to try things and acknowledge when, okay, this was great, this wasn't great, how do we continue to tweak through, and ask for help. There's probably a lot of people within respective organizations that, especially on the engineering and the product side, that are living and breathing this every single day. And I love to find organizations that are partnering across the entire company to help advance the business forward.
Great. And Ken, any
And
last?
then, lastly, know who you're hiring, right? I think we're in a phase right now where it's sort of like social media was 10 years ago, when everyone was an influencer, or excuse me, social media expert, and that they posted on Facebook twice, and they put something on LinkedIn, so now they're social media experts. Be careful when people say they're AI experts, right? I think that's the other piece, is really understanding their knowledge of that. If you're looking for someone to use it as a tool, really understand how they're using it as a tool, versus say, oh, I built a spreadsheet for my personal finances and now I'm an AI expert, right? It's really understanding that piece of it the best you can, because I don't think really any of us really fully understand the capabilities of that. And it's really talking to the person, getting a good understanding of what they're doing. And like you were saying, David, don't be afraid to try as well either, right? Because I think, we're still at its infancy of all this. And like I said earlier, what's it going to be into 12 months? What's going to be into 18 months? Because 18 months ago, ChatGPT only went to 2021, right? So, or 2 years ago. So, how quick it's actually happening and changing, and with agents and with all of that, is really going to be the game changer moving forward. So really just get a good if you're the leader, get a good understanding of what you're looking for, get a good understanding of their, more importantly, their business sense. And then, lastly, it's sort of, what's your connection? How do you connect with the person? I think those are probably the three biggest pieces.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank all three of you for your great insights today. I'd like to thank our audience for joining and participating. Some great questions. We look forward to doing more of these, but really appreciate everybody's time. You can find all these folks on LinkedIn and through their company pages, and as well as myself. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks all.
Thank you.